The gray t-shirt rose slowly, inch by inch, revealing skin marked with ink as black as midnight. Two serpents intertwined, flames dancing between their coiled bodies. The artwork covered her entire back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, from the base of her neck to the small of her spine. Sergeant Dante Callahan's smile froze on his face. His confident smirk dissolved like sugar and acid. 200 soldiers stood motionless, phones forgotten in their hands, mouths open in stunned silence. The woman they had mocked for 30 minutes was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back. 30 minutes earlier, Fort Davidson sprawled across 12,000 acres of Texas scrubland like a monument to American military might. Friday evening, the heat still radiating from the concrete even as the sun bled orange across the western horizon. Inside the main canteen, 200 soldiers unwound after a long week of training, exercises, their voices creating a wall of noise that echoed off the industrial ceiling. The massive space smelled of industrial cleaning solution, fried food, and the particular mixture of sweat and determination that clings to military personnel like a second skin. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that distinctive institutional glow that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. At corner tables, groups clustered around trays of food that would never win culinary awards, but filled bellies efficiently. Young privates fresh from basic training sat with the nervous energy of those still learning their place. Seasoned sergeants occupied their traditional territories with the casual authority of men and women who had earned their stripes through years of service. Near the emergency exit, in a booth that offered clear sight lines to both entrances, Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne lowered his newspaper just enough to observe the room with the practiced eye of a man who had survived combat by paying attention to details others missed. At 68 years old, Hawthorne looked like he had been carved from the same Texas granite that formed the foundation beneath the base. Weathered face, steel gray hair cropped military short, shoulders still square despite decades of carrying the weight of command. He wore his uniform with the unconscious precision of someone for whom military bearing was not performance, but identity. He was here as a consultant. Officially retired for 7 years, but the Army had a habit of calling back men like Hawthorne when situations required the kind of wisdom that only came from decades of watching how soldiers moved, how they thought, how they revealed their true character when they believed no one important was watching. His assignment was simple: observe the new generation of leaders at Fort Davidson and provide assessment on their readiness for modern challenges. What he was about to witness would exceed every parameter of that mission. The canteen doors opened. The woman who entered looked utterly devastatingly out of place. She stood maybe 5 feet 2 inches, slender build that seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of battle-hardened soldiers. Long blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun that let curls escape to frame a face with delicate features and startlingly blue eyes. She wore an oversized military jacket that hung on her small frame like borrowed clothes on a child playing dress-up. Beneath it, a fitted gray t-shirt and standard military pants that somehow emphasized rather than concealed how small she was. She looked lost. She looked vulnerable. She looked like prey that had wandered into a den of wolves. Hawthorne's trained eye caught something the others missed. The way she paused in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. The way her eyes moved across the room in a pattern that was too systematic to be casual. The way her feet, despite her apparently uncertain posture, had shifted into a balanced stance that allowed movement in any direction without telegraphing intent. He had seen that bearing before. In Iraq, in soldiers who knew violence intimately and wore the knowledge like a second skin beneath their uniforms. The woman moved toward the serving counter with small, hesitant steps. She clutched a crumpled paper napkin in hands that trembled slightly. Her shoulders hunched forward in a posture that screamed uncertainty and fear. Every instinct in the room read her as harmless, ordinary, completely overwhelmed. Every instinct was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now, huh? The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. Sergeant Dante Callahan stood from his table near the center of the room, his 6'4" frame towering over those around him. At 33, he had the kind of muscled physique that came from years of physical training, combined with the aggressive confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. His voice dripped with contempt designed to wound. The effect was immediate. Conversations died, heads turned, 200 pairs of eyes locked onto the small woman by the serving counter. She froze. Dante took a step closer. His boots struck the concrete floor with deliberate force. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a judge's gavel declaring sentence. I mean, seriously, he continued playing to his audience with the practiced ease of a bully who had perfected his craft. Who authorized this little fashion show? This is a military installation, not some community theater production. Laughter erupted around him, harsh, immediate, cruel. The kind of laughter that feeds on someone else's humiliation and grows fat on their discomfort. Phones materialized in hands like weapons being drawn. Screens glowed as cameras focused. This was content, entertainment, the kind of thing that would play well on social media if they were lucky enough to catch something truly embarrassing. What none of them knew was that they were being recorded as well, that every word, every laugh, every cruel gesture was being documented by systems far more sophisticated than their phones, that the data being collected would be used not for entertainment, but for evaluation, assessment, judgment. The small woman remained perfectly still. Her blue eyes dropped to the floor. Her shoulders hunched further forward. Her hands continued their slight trembling as she clutched that crumpled napkin like a lifeline. But Hawthorne noticed what the others did not. The trembling was in her hands only, not her core, not her legs. Her breathing remained steady and controlled despite the visible shaking. Her feet had not moved from their balanced position. He had seen this before, in enemy combatants who feigned weakness before striking, in undercover operatives who wore vulnerability like camouflage. His right hand moved slowly to the encrypted phone in his jacket pocket, not to call for help, but to record. This was about to get interesting. Lieutenant Veronica Ashford rose from her seat with the fluid grace of someone who had built her entire identity around being the most intimidating woman in any room. At 30 years old, she wore her uniform like armor and her perfectly styled dark hair like a crown. She had fought for every inch of respect in a male-dominated environment and had learned that sometimes the only way to survive was to become harder than those around you, crueler, more ruthless. She stepped forward and circled the small blonde woman like a predator assessing prey. Her heels clicked against the floor in a rhythm designed to increase psychological pressure. "Oh my God," Veronica said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern that fooled no one. "Sweetie, are you lost? The costume party is probably at the community center downtown, not on a federal military installation." More laughter, more phones recording, the pressure building like steam in a sealed container. The woman's response came barely above a whisper, soft, uncertain. The voice of someone who desperately wanted to disappear. I have orders to report here." "Orders?" Dante's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Orders from who? Your mommy? Your drama teacher?" He gestured broadly to his audience, playing to the crowd with practiced ease. "Look at this, people. We've got ourselves a lost little princess wearing daddy's clothes. Probably got lost on the way to the mall and ended up here by mistake." The mockery should have been devastating. Any normal person would have fled, tears streaming, dignity in tatters, the kind of humiliation that left psychological scars that lasted years. But the woman simply stood there, absorbing each insult with an unnatural stillness that only the most observant would recognize as tactical patience. What the jeering crowd could not see was how her eyes moved. Controlled sweeps that automatically cataloged exits counted personnel-assessed threat levels, the movements of a predator, not prey. What they could not feel was how her breathing had shifted to combat patterns. 4 counts in, hold 2, 4 counts out. The rhythm designed to keep heart rate optimal for violence. What they could not know was that beneath the trembling hands and hunched shoulders, she was in complete control. Hawthorne caught it all, every micro-expression, every subtle shift in weight, every controlled breath. His military instincts, honed over 45 years of service, were screaming warnings that something was very wrong with this picture. He made a mental note to increase his observation protocols. This woman was far more dangerous than her appearance suggested. Corporal Blake Hendricks decided to join the entertainment. At 30 years old, he was a weapons specialist with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone working with dull tools. He had the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing he could handle any weapon the military issued and most that it didn't. "Hey, princess," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You know basic drill commands, right? Since you're wearing our uniform and all." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Blake expected hesitation, confusion, maybe tears. He expected the usual civilian response to military terminology and protocols they could not possibly understand. What he got instead made him take an involuntary step backward. "Yes, Corporal." The woman's voice changed. no longer soft and uncertain, crisp, clear. The voice of someone who had been taught to project command even when whispering. She snapped to attention with movements so precise, so perfectly executed, that the laughter began to falter. Her posture transformed from cowering civilian to textbook military bearing in the space of a heartbeat. Spine straight, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward, feet at a 45-degree angle, every detail exactly as specified in basic training manuals. The casual chatter in the canteen began to die as more soldiers noticed something was not quite right about this supposedly helpless woman. "About face," Blake commanded, certain he could trip her up with the timing. The woman executed the movement flawlessly. Her combat boots clicked against the concrete floor with parade ground precision. The timing was perfect, the execution without flaw. She pivoted exactly 180 degrees and came to rest in the proper position without the slightest wobble or adjustment. Present arms. Blake continued, his confidence wavering slightly. Without hesitation, she brought her hands up in the exact position required for presenting an imaginary rifle. Her form was so perfect, it could have been used as a demonstration video for new recruits. Elbows at the correct angle, wrists straight, fingers positioned precisely where regulation demanded. The watching soldiers leaned forward despite themselves, caught between disbelief and growing unease. This was not a civilian playing at soldier. This was someone who had been trained, extensively, by people who demanded perfection. Dante sensed the shift in atmosphere and moved quickly to regain control of the situation. His psychological need to dominate overrode the warning signs that were becoming impossible to ignore. "Lucky guess," he declared loudly, his voice carrying false confidence. "Anyone can memorize a few moves from YouTube videos. But let's see how you handle real equipment." He unholstered his sidearm, a Beretta M9, standard issue, 9mm, 15-round magazine. He ejected the magazine with theatrical flair, cleared the chamber to ensure the weapon was safe, and extended the empty pistol toward the woman. "Field strip and reassemble. 30 seconds. It was meant to be an impossible challenge. Military weapons were complex precision instruments that took months of training to handle competently. Even experienced soldiers needed 40 or 50 seconds to completely disassemble and reassemble a service pistol under pressure. No civilian could possibly meet that standard. The woman's hands moved. They moved like liquid lightning. The weapon came apart in her grasp with a series of soft clicks, mechanical whispers that spoke of absolute familiarity. Spring, barrel, slide, frame. Each component was removed with surgical precision and laid out in perfect order on the nearby table. The watching soldiers leaned forward, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. 15 seconds. That was all it had taken her to completely disassemble a service pistol that many of them still struggled with after months of training. The reassembly was even more impressive. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding each motion as the weapon reformed in her hands. Click, snap, slide. The sounds of metal finding its proper home with the certainty of planets following their orbits. 12 seconds. The pistol was whole again. The action smooth as silk as she tested the mechanism before safely returning it to Dante. Total time 27 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Dante stared at the weapon in his hands as if it might transform into a serpent and bite him. His confident smirk had been replaced by something approaching confusion. Veronica's mouth had fallen open, her practiced superiority momentarily shattered by witnessing something that should not have been possible. Blake was frantically trying to remember if he had ever seen anyone, including the weapons instructors, handle a sidearm with that level of effortless competence. The answer was no. Hawthorne felt a chill run down his spine despite the Texas heat. He had served with special operations personnel in Iraq, had trained alongside some of the most elite soldiers the military produced. He recognized that level of weapons handling. It belonged to people whose very existence was often classified. He activated his encrypted phone and sent a brief message to contacts who operated in shadows deeper than standard military intelligence. One word: confirmed. In the back of the room near the serving line, Private Finn Hawthorne felt something twist uncomfortably in his stomach as he watched the treatment this woman was receiving. At 19 years old, Finn was still soft around the edges, despite 3 months of basic training. He had his grandfather's build, but had not yet grown into it. Tall and lean, with the kind of face that still held traces of boyhood. He wore his uniform with conscious effort rather than unconscious habit. Unlike the others, Finn came from a family where respect was earned through character, not intimidation. His grandfather had been a sniper in Iraq. had earned medals for actions that remained classified decades later. The old man had taught Finn that true strength was not about dominating others, but about standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. What was happening here violated everything Finn had been taught. "Maybe we should just leave her alone," he said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried in the sudden stillness of the canteen like a gunshot. Dante's head snapped around like a striking snake, his eyes locked onto Finn with predatory focus. "What was that, Private?" Finn felt his mouth go dry. Fear twisted in his gut, but he thought about his grandfather's stories, about soldiers who had faced enemy fire not because they were unafraid, but because standing up mattered more than safety. "I said maybe we should leave her alone, Sergeant." His voice was stronger now, despite the tremor underneath. "She's not bothering anyone." Veronica's smile turned predatory. She had found a new target, a way to redirect attention and reassert dominance. "Oh, look at that," she said, her voice poisoned, wrapped in silk. "The newbie's got a crush on our little dress-up doll. How sweet." The words were designed to inflict maximum psychological damage, to make Finn feel small, foolish, to teach him that kindness was weakness in this environment. Dante's expression darkened. In his world, of respect was a zero-sum game. Any kindness shown to his target was a direct attack on his position, a challenge to his authority that could not be tolerated. "Private Hawthorne," his voice carried the weight of threat, "since you're so concerned about our guest's feelings, maybe you'd like to join her for whatever comes next." The implication was clear. Stand with her and face the same humiliation, the same mockery, the potential end of a military career before it had really begun. Finn felt his resolve waver. The easy path opened before him. Apologize. Step back. Let this woman face her fate alone. Preserve his own future. He looked at her. For just a moment, her eyes lifted from the floor and met his. What he saw there made his breath catch. Not gratitude, not relief, but a kind of ancient, weary recognition. As if she had seen this scenario play out countless times before and knew exactly how it would end. As if she had been waiting for someone to make exactly this choice. Finn thought about his grandfather, about the stories of soldiers who had held positions when retreat would have been easier, who had covered their brothers in arms even when it meant putting themselves in danger. "Yes, Sergeant," he said, his voice steady now. "If that's what it takes." The woman's eyes held his for one more second. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a connection forged in the moment when most people would have looked away. Then her gaze dropped back to the floor. But Finn had seen enough. Whatever happened next, he had made the right choice. Hawthorne, watching from his corner booth, felt pride surge through his chest. His grandson had just demonstrated the kind of moral courage that no amount of training could instill, the kind that came from character, from values, from being raised right. The old sergeant major made a mental note. Finn was going places. The atmosphere in the canteen had shifted. What had started as casual Friday evening entertainment had transformed into something darker, more dangerous, the kind of situation that preceded violence. Soldiers who had been laughing minutes before now watched with the uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something that might have consequences far beyond simple entertainment. Colonel Marcus Webb chose that moment to enter the canteen. At 61 years old, Webb had the weathered face of a career officer who had seen action in multiple conflicts. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. He possessed the kind of situational awareness that came from decades of making life or death decisions in combat environments. He immediately noticed the crowd formation, the cell phones, the palpable tension radiating from the center of the room like heat from a furnace. "What's the situation here?" Webb's voice cut through the noise like a blade, carrying 37 years of command authority that demanded immediate attention and honest answers. Dante snapped to attention, but his smile remained confident. He had not yet realized how badly this was about to go for him. "Just conducting an impromptu inspection, sir. Checking to make sure personnel are properly authorized to wear military uniforms on base." The explanation was technically reasonable. Base security was serious business. Unauthorized personnel wearing military uniforms was a legitimate concern. But Webb's experienced eye caught the predatory gleam in Dante's expression, the cruel anticipation in Veronica's posture, the phone's recording, the crowd's uncomfortable energy. This was not security protocol. This was bullying dressed in official language. Webb's gaze moved to the small blonde woman, taking in her oversized jacket, her civilian clothes beneath, her obvious discomfort. To his experienced eye, she looked like exactly what Dante claimed. A confused civilian who had somehow ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, But Webb had not survived 3 wars by taking situations at face value. "Ma'am," he said, his voice not unkind but carrying the weight of official inquiry, "do you have proper authorization to be on this installation?" The woman reached into her jacket pocket with movements so careful they seemed choreographed. She produced a slightly crumpled set of papers and extended them toward Webb. "Yes, sir. Orders to report for temporary duty assignment." Webb accepted the documents. His expression grew increasingly puzzled as he read. The orders appeared legitimate. They bore all the correct signatures and authorization codes. The official seals looked genuine, but something about them seemed off. The assignment details were vague, the reporting structure unclear. The authorization level was classified several grades above Webb's clearance, which should not have been possible for standard temporary duty orders. It was the kind of paperwork that raised more questions than it answered. "These orders are unusual," Webb said slowly, his military mind automatically flagging inconsistencies. "The authorization codes are correct, but the assignment parameters are classified above my clearance level." Dante's confidence flickered for the first time. In his experience, confused civilians did not carry classified military orders with authorization codes that stumped full colonels. Veronica sensed Dante's uncertainty and moved to support her superior officer. She had built her career on reading situations and positioning herself advantageously. "Sir," she interjected, her voice carrying practiced deference. "With respect, those documents could be forgeries. Identity theft is a serious problem these days. Military credentials are valuable on the black market." It was a reasonable concern. Webb nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify these orders through proper channels. Until then, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to remain here under supervision." The woman nodded simply, her compliance so complete it seemed almost rehearsed. But Finn noticed something the others missed: the way her eyes moved as Webb spoke, cataloging the positions of every person in the room, calculating angles and distances with the unconscious precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat. Hawthorne noticed too. He rose from his corner booth with the slow deliberation of age and approached the main group. All eyes turned to the legendary Sergeant Major. "Colonel Webb," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying the gravitas of 45 years in uniform, "I recommend letting this situation play out." Webb turned surprise evident on his face. "Sergeant Major, why?" Hawthorne's eyes were fixed on the small blonde woman, on the subtle signs that separated trained operative from frightened civilian. "Because I've seen that look before, sir. In Iraq, right before the enemy revealed their true capabilities." He gestured to the woman with his weathered hand. "This young lady is not what she appears to be, and I suspect Sergeant Callahan is about to learn that lesson the hard way." Dante felt control slipping through his fingers like sand. His psychological need to dominate, to be the alpha in every situation, was driving him to escalate beyond reason. "I think," he said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous quality, "it's time for a more thorough inspection. Strip search procedures. Make our guest isn't carrying anything that might be dangerous to base security." The words hit the canteen like a physical blow. Webb's face darkened with anger. "Sergeant, you are way out of line." "Am I, sir?" Dante replied, his tone respectful but carrying an undertone of challenge. "We have an unidentified individual with questionable credentials and demonstrated weapons proficiency on our installation. At what point does prudent security override social politeness?" The logic was sound enough to give Webb pause. Security was paramount. The technical justifications provided cover, but the malicious intent was clear to anyone with eyes. Veronica stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to position herself as the voice of female solidarity while advancing Dante's agenda. "I could conduct the search, sir. Keep it professional. Make sure there are no irregularities." The offer was made with false concern, but the malicious anticipation in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been building toward this moment, the ultimate humiliation that would restore the proper order of things. Finn felt something twist in his stomach as he realized where this was heading. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, talking about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. "Sir, this isn't necessary," Finn said, his voice cutting through the tension. "She's cooperated with everything we've asked." Dante turned on him like a wolf on wounded prey. "Private Hawthorne, you seem to have strong opinions about how we should handle security procedures. Maybe you'd like to explain to the colonel why you think protocol should be ignored." It was a direct challenge to Finn's military career. Follow orders and watch injustice unfold, or stand up for what was right and face consequences. Webb felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. His command authority was being undermined by Dante's aggressive interpretation of security protocols. The technical justifications were sound enough to provide cover. But this was wrong. He opened his mouth to put a stop to it. But the woman's voice cut through the tension with unexpected clarity. "It's fine." 3 words, spoken with such calm acceptance that they seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "If Sergeant Callahan believes a search is necessary for base security, I'll comply." The words were spoken with quiet acceptance, but something in her tone suggested this capitulation was not defeat. It was a choice. Dante's face lit up with predatory satisfaction. He interpreted her compliance as final victory, the complete dominance he had been building toward all evening. "Outstanding," he said. "Lieutenant Ashford, conduct the search. Make it thorough." But Hawthorne felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the woman's reaction. Her body language remained submissive, almost defeated. But her eyes. There was something in her eyes that suggested Dante had just made the most catastrophic error in judgment of his entire military career. Webb recognized it too, the subtle shift from victim to something else entirely. In 37 years of military service, he had learned to read the signs that preceded violence, and every instinct he possessed was suddenly screaming warnings. "Wait," Webb said, his voice carrying sudden urgency. "I think we should—" "No, sir," the woman interrupted gently, her hands moving to the buttons of her oversized uniform jacket. "The sergeant is right. If there are questions about my authorization to be here, they should be resolved through proper procedures." Her fingers found the first button. Dante's smile widened with anticipation. Veronica stepped forward with eager satisfaction. The watching crowd pressed closer. Phones recording, everyone anticipating the moment when the pretense would finally be stripped away. But Finn noticed what the others missed. As the woman's jacket began to come undone, her breathing had changed. The rapid, shallow breaths of fear had been replaced by something else entirely. The measured, controlled breathing patterns used in combat situations, to maintain heart rate, to ensure optimal performance under stress. Hawthorne activated his encrypted phone one final time, sending a brief message that would set events in motion far beyond Fort Davidson's walls. "Target preparing to reveal identity. Witness present. Recording active." The response was instant. "Confirmed. Maintain observation. Do not interfere regardless of circumstances." The woman's jacket fell away, leaving her standing in the fitted gray t-shirt that emphasized both her delicate build and the unexpected definition of someone in peak physical condition. The fabric clung to muscles that spoke of intensive training, of a body honed for purposes that civilian life could not explain. "Now the shirt," Dante ordered, his voice thick with anticipated victory. The woman's hands moved to the hem of her gray t-shirt, her movements calm and deliberate despite the hostile attention focused on her like a laser. Around the canteen, conversations had stopped entirely. The usual Friday evening chaos replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes revelation. Webb felt his unease crystallizing into genuine alarm. In his experience, innocent civilians faced with public humiliation displayed predictable reactions: tears, anger, desperate attempts to preserve dignity. This woman displayed none of these. Instead, there was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that reminded Webb of elite operators he had encountered in classified briefings during his time in Afghanistan. It was the kind of deadly calm that came from absolute confidence in one's own capabilities. "Sergeant," Webb said, his voice carrying new urgency, "I'm ordering you to stand down." But Dante was beyond listening to orders. His psychological need to dominate had overridden military discipline. "Sir, the search is already in progress. We need to see this through." Veronica positioned herself for optimal viewing angle, her phone ready to capture what she assumed would be the ultimate humiliation. Blake and the others pressed closer, their expressions mixing cruel anticipation with the uncomfortable excitement of witnessing someone else's destruction. Only Finn seemed to recognize that something was terribly wrong. His grandfather's combat instincts, inherited through blood and training, were screaming warnings that he could not quite articulate. Hawthorne watched from his position near the wall, his trained eye cataloging every detail of the woman's behavior. The complete absence of fear, the measured breathing, the way her eyes continued to track potential threats, even while appearing submissive. It all pointed to a conclusion that he had suspected but had not dared confirm. The woman's hands gripped the hem of her t-shirt. The entire canteen held its breath. Dante's smile reached its maximum width. Veronica's phone focused for optimal recording. 200 soldiers prepared to witness what they assumed would be the final destruction of a pretentious civilian. None of them realized they were about to see something that would change their understanding of power identity and the dangerous assumption that strength always announces itself with aggression. The woman began to lift her shirt, revealing first the toned muscles of her abdomen, then the defined lines of someone whose physical conditioning went far beyond civilian fitness standards. But it was what lay beyond, hidden beneath the fabric, that would transform every assumption in the room. The gray t-shirt rose higher, and the edge of something dark against pale skin began to emerge. Not injury, not imperfection, but the beginning of something deliberate, something that spoke of meaning and significance beyond casual decoration. Intricate black lines that whispered of professional artistry, of hours spent under the needle, creating something that was part art, part declaration, part warning. The room held its breath as more of the design became visible. Two serpents, massive, their bodies intertwined in perfect symmetry across her entire back. One dark as midnight, one gleaming like polished bone, each scale individually detailed, each curve flowing with organic perfection. Flames surrounded them, intricate tongues of fire that seemed to dance and flicker in the fluorescent lighting. The entire design covered her back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, from the base of her neck to her lower spine. A canvas of skin transformed into something that spoke of power balance and deadly purpose. Complete silence descended on the canteen like a physical weight, the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone present knows they are witnessing something that will change everything. Finn was the first to break it, his voice barely a whisper. "Holy, that's the dragon mark." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Every soldier with advanced training knew what Finn had just identified. The dragon mark was legend, myth, the kind of story told in hushed voices in classified briefings. Only 12 people alive were authorized to wear that marking, and each one represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne stood, his weathered frame coming to full military attention, his hand rising in a crisp salute that belonged in ceremonial reviews. His voice carried the weight of recognition, of respect earned through blood and sacrifice. Lieutenant Alexis Brennan, call sign Ghost Serpent, Navy SEAL Team 6. The formal identification landed like a mortar round in the stunned silence. Dante Callahan's face drained of all color, his confident smirk dissolving into an expression of pure horror. Veronica Ashford's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor with a sound like breaking bones. Blake Hendricks staggered backward, his hands involuntarily rising as if in surrender. The recognition spread through the canteen like wildfire. The dragon mark, only 12 people alive. Ghost Serpent, one of the most decorated and feared special operators in military history. The woman they had mocked for 30 minutes was someone whose very existence was classified at levels that made most of their security clearances look like kindergarten hall passes. And they had just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. Alexis Brennan lowered her shirt with the same calm precision she had used for everything else. The dragon mark disappeared beneath gray fabric, but the knowledge of its presence was burned into every mind in the room. When she spoke, her voice carried a new authority, the voice of someone accustomed to command, to life or death decisions, to operations that existed in the shadows between peace and war. At ease, everyone. 2 words, but they transformed the entire space. 200 soldiers stood frozen, phones forgotten. Cruel entertainment transformed into the dawning realization that they had just witnessed something unprecedented, and the reckoning was only beginning. The silence stretched, thick as concrete, heavy as guilt. 200 soldiers stood frozen in positions they would remember for the rest of their lives, the moment when entertainment became education, when mockery transformed into the most expensive lesson of their military careers. Alexis Brennan let the silence work for her. She had learned long ago that the space between words carried as much weight as the words themselves, that sometimes the most powerful statement was simply standing still and letting others process what they had just witnessed. She stood 5 feet 2 inches, blonde hair still loose around her face. Blue eyes that had seemed so vulnerable 30 minutes ago now carried the weight of someone who had looked into darkness and emerged with knowledge that most people could not imagine. The dragon mark was hidden again beneath her gray t-shirt, but its presence filled the room like radiation, invisible but unmistakably there, changing the fundamental nature of everything it touched. Colonel Marcus Webb remained at attention, his salute still crisp despite the shock radiating through his system. 37 years of service had taught him to recognize when protocol demanded respect, regardless of personal surprise. Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne stood with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. His weathered face showed no surprise, only the grim acknowledgement that his instincts had once again proven accurate. Dante Callahan looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. His 6'4" frame seemed to shrink, his aggressive confidence evaporating like water on hot concrete. The psychological foundations he had built his identity upon crumbling with each passing second. Veronica Ashford had gone pale, her perfectly styled appearance suddenly seeming like costume jewelry next to the real thing. Her phone lay forgotten on the floor. The recording it contained now evidence of a federal crime rather than social media entertainment. Blake Hendricks was trying to remember if he had ever seen a Navy SEAL in person before, trying to reconcile the small woman in front of him with the legendary operators whose exploits existed only in classified files and whispered stories. And Finn Hawthorne, young, idealistic, standing straighter now. His decision to speak up vindicated in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. Alexis let her gaze move across the assembled faces, reading them, cataloging their reactions, building a psychological profile that would inform the assessments she would file in the coming days. When she spoke, her voice carried across the canteen with the kind of projection that required no volume. Command presence. The ability to fill a space not with noise but with authority. At ease, Colonel Webb. Webb lowered his salute but remained standing, his mind racing through the implications of what had just been revealed. Alexis turned slowly, making eye contact with soldiers throughout the room, letting them see her fully now, not as prey but as predator, not as victim but as someone who had chosen every moment of the past 30 minutes with tactical precision. My name is Lieutenant Alexis Brennan, call sign Ghost Serpent, Navy SEAL Team 6. For the past 3 months, I have been conducting a comprehensive security assessment of Fort Davidson under deep cover. Her words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples that spread outward. Every interaction, every insult, every moment of harassment has been documented and analyzed. Sergeant Callahan's behavior has provided extensive data on leadership failures, cultural vulnerabilities, and systemic problems within this installation's command structure. Dante made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan, the full weight of his situation crushing down on him like a physical force. Alexis continued, her tone remaining level, professional, the voice of someone delivering a mission briefing rather than passing judgment. What you witnessed tonight was not random. It was not accident. It was a carefully designed evaluation to identify which personnel could be trusted with the real security of this nation and which represented liabilities that needed to be addressed. She pulled a small device from her jacket pocket. Military-grade tablet, encrypted, the kind of hardware that required security clearances most of the people in this room would never possess. A few taps on the screen, the main display monitors in the canteen flickered to life. Surveillance footage began playing. Week 1, Alexis entering the base for the first time, being processed through security. Her credentials showing a low-level administrative assignment, the kind of position that would give her access to the base without drawing attention. Week 2, footage of her in various locations around Fort Davidson. Cafeteria, training areas, administrative offices, always watching, always observing, her small frame making her easy to overlook, her unremarkable appearance allowing her to blend into backgrounds. Week 4, video of Dante Callahan meeting with someone in civilian clothes in the parking lot outside the base, the two men speaking quietly, an envelope changing hands. Dante's face went from pale to gray. Week 8, more meetings, more envelopes, a pattern becoming clear. Week 12, tonight, the setup, the trap, the revelation. Alexis let the footage speak for itself, let the assembled soldiers process what they were seeing. General Theodore Blackwood, 72 years old, retired from military service in disgrace 15 years ago, court-martialed for selling classified information to private military contractors, dishonorably discharged. But retirement had not stopped him. If anything, it had freed him. Alexis tapped the screen again. Financial records appeared. Money transfers. Shell companies. A web of transactions that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning 17 military installations across the United States. General Blackwood has been building a private military force, Alexis said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months piecing together evidence. Recruiting disgruntled soldiers, offering them money and promises of respect they feel they have been denied by the military establishment. She gestured to the screens. Fort Davidson is not unique. It's part of a larger operation. Blackwood identified bases with toxic leadership structures, cultures where good soldiers were being driven away by bullies and careerists, where the best and brightest were becoming disillusioned. More data appeared, names, dates, amounts. Over 400 soldiers recruited in the past 18 months, each one a skilled operator, each one feeling abandoned by the system they had sworn to serve. He turned that disillusionment into a weapon, Alexis continued, convinced them that the only way to serve their country was outside official channels, through his organization, his private army. Webb felt his blood run cold. What's his endgame? Alexis met his eyes. Power. Blackwood sells his services to whoever pays. Foreign governments, corporations, anyone with enough money and the right enemies. He's creating a shadow military force accountable to no one but him. She paused. Let that sink in. And if the opportunity arose, if the political situation deteriorated enough, he'd use that force to stage a coup. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Coup. The kind of word that belonged in third world countries, in history books about failed states and military dictatorships, not in conversations about the United States military. But the evidence on the screens painted a picture that could not be denied. Hawthorne stepped forward, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who had lived through enough history to know that the unthinkable became reality more often than people wanted to believe. How long have you known about this lieutenant? Alexis turned to face him. The man who had been her mentor, who had kept a promise for decades without knowing if it would ever matter. 6 months, Sergeant Major. I was initially assigned to investigate suspicious personnel departures from naval installations. The pattern led me to Blackwood. From there, it became clear this was bigger than one service branch. She gestured to the screens. Fort Davidson represented a perfect test case. Toxic leadership under Sergeant Callahan. Good soldiers like Private Hawthorne being subjected to an environment that would drive them away. Exactly the conditions Blackwood exploits. Finn felt a chill run down his spine. He had almost become one of those statistics, another disillusioned soldier ripe for recruitment by someone promising that the real fight was somewhere else. Veronica found her voice. It came out smaller than she intended. You let us humiliate you. For 3 months. Why? Alexis's expression softened slightly. Not with sympathy, but with the patience of someone explaining tactics to a student. Because character reveals itself under pressure, Lieutenant Ashford. Anyone can act with honor when being watched, when they know there are consequences. The measure of true character is what people do when they believe they have power over someone weaker, when they think no one important is watching. The words landed like punches. I needed to know who would stand up, who would speak out, who had the moral courage to do the right thing even when it cost them something. Her gaze moved to Finn. Private Hawthorne demonstrated that courage. He's exactly the kind of soldier this military needs. The kind Blackwood can never corrupt because his values aren't for sale. Finn felt heat rise to his face, pride mixed with embarrassment. His grandfather caught his eye and nodded, approval radiating from the old sergeant major like warmth from a fire. Dante remained silent, his world continuing to collapse around him. The money he had taken, the promises Blackwood had made, the toxic culture he had built, all of it now revealed as part of a conspiracy that threatened national security. He had sold his soul, and for what? To be a pawn in someone else's game. Alexis tapped her tablet again. New footage appeared, this time showing meetings between various personnel across multiple bases. The scope of Blackwood's operation laid bare in visual form that could not be denied or explained away. 3 weeks ago, General Blackwood approached Sergeant Callahan, Alexis said, her voice remaining level despite the gravity of what she was revealing. Offered him $200,000 to create a hostile work environment, to drive good soldiers away, to create the kind of disillusionment that makes recruitment easier. Dante flinched as if struck. He took the money, Alexis continued, not because he's a bad person at his core, but because he needed it. His mother is dying, stage 4 cancer, medical bills that insurance won't cover, experimental treatments that cost more than a sergeant's salary can afford. The revelation shifted something in the room. Dante was still guilty, still culpable, but the picture became more complex, less black and white. Blackwood is expert at finding pressure points, Alexis said. Medical bills, student loans, family problems. He offers solutions, money, respect, a sense of purpose. And by the time people realize what they've agreed to, they're already compromised. She looked directly at Dante. You made a choice, a bad one. But you're not the real enemy here. You're a victim Blackwood exploited. Dante's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall in front of 200 soldiers. But the weight of guilt and relief and shame created a pressure that was almost unbearable. Veronica stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly. He approached me too, offered me 150,000, said it would prove I was serious about advancement, that women had to play harder than men to succeed. She looked at Alexis. I took it, not all of it, but I took the first payment. I thought, I thought it was just about being tough, about showing I could be as ruthless as any man. Alexis nodded, understanding without excusing. He tells people what they want to hear, validates their grievances, makes corruption seem like empowerment. Blake raised his hand hesitantly, like a student in class rather than a combat veteran. Ma'am, why tell us this now? Why reveal yourself? Alexis's smile was cold, because Blackwood just made a critical mistake. She tapped the tablet. A new image appeared. Finn Hawthorne, bound to a chair, in what looked like an old training facility. Timestamp showing the photo had been taken 15 minutes ago. Gasps rippled through the canteen. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. His grandson, his blood, in danger. The message below the photo was brief. Hawthorne, old training range, 1 hour, come alone or the boy dies. Webb reached for his radio. I'll send tactical teams immediately. No, Alexis's voice cut through the canteen like a blade. You won't. Webb turned, confusion and anger warring on his face. Lieutenant, that's my base, my responsibility. And this is my operation, Colonel. Alexis's voice carried absolute authority now, the kind that came not from rank but from expertise in operational command. I've been planning for this contingency for 6 weeks. She pulled up a tactical display on her tablet. Heat signatures, GPS coordinates, a map of the old training range 3 miles north of the main base. I've had tracking devices on Private Hawthorne since week 10 of my assessment. Blackwood taking him was not a surprise. It was the expected response once I revealed my identity. She zoomed in on the map. About 8 contractors, all former military, Blackwood's personal security team. They're positioned here, here, and here. Standard defensive perimeter, professional but predictable. Hawthorne stepped closer, looking at the tactical display with the eye of someone who had planned similar operations. You knew they'd take Finn. I planned for it, Alexis corrected. There's a difference. Blackwood's pattern is consistent. When threatened, he takes hostages to establish leverage, preferably someone connected to his opposition. She met Hawthorne's gaze. Your grandson was the obvious choice. Young, vulnerable, related to someone I respect. Maximum emotional impact with minimum effort. Finn's voice came from the crowd, small, uncertain. You used me as bait. Alexis turned to face him. I gave you a choice, Private. Every day for the past 2 weeks, I could have pulled you from this operation, sent you somewhere safe. But that would have meant leaving other soldiers exposed, letting Blackwood continue his recruitment unchallenged. She walked toward him, her small frame somehow commanding more presence than people twice her size. You chose to stay, chose to stand up, chose to do what was right even when it was hard. That wasn't manipulation. That was you demonstrating exactly the kind of character that makes someone worth protecting. Finn swallowed hard, processing the revelation that the past 3 months had been orchestrated at levels he couldn't have imagined. The tracking device ensured I always knew where you were, Alexis continued. Your vital signs are being monitored in real time. Heart rate 95 beats per minute, elevated but not panicking, breathing steady. You're scared but in control. She showed him the display, his biometric data scrolling across the screen in real time. I wouldn't have let you be taken if I couldn't guarantee getting you back. Webb was studying the tactical display, his combat experience recognizing the sophistication of the planning. This is a full-scale operation, not just an assessment. Correct, Colonel. Alexis pulled up another screen. This one showing similar operations at 16 other military installations. Tonight at precisely 2100 hours, Ghost Dragon protocols initiated at 17 bases simultaneously. The scope was staggering. Each installation had a deep cover operator. Each one spent months gathering intelligence on Blackwood's network. Each one identified and documented corruption. And tonight all of us revealed ourselves at the same moment. She gestured to the screens showing footage from other bases. Other operators revealing their identities. Other toxic leaders realizing they had been caught. Blackwood's entire recruitment network is being dismantled as we speak. 400 compromised soldiers are being offered choices: return to honorable service with counseling and rehabilitation, or face court-martial. Webb shook his head in amazement. The coordination required for something like this. 18 months of planning, Alexis said. 47 operators across 3 service branches. Intelligence support from agencies that officially don't exist. All to stop one man from building a private army that could threaten the constitutional order of the United States. She let that sink in. Fort Davidson was never just about toxic culture, Colonel. It was about preventing a coup. Webb frowned, something clicking in his mind. But Lieutenant, with 17 bases compromised, why Fort Davidson specifically? There were installations with worse toxic culture, bases with more strategic value. Why here? Alexis's expression shifted. A cold smile crossed her face, the kind that suggested she had been waiting for someone to ask exactly that question. Because I chose Fort Davidson, Colonel. The room went silent. She pulled up more data on her tablet. Analysis charts, recruitment patterns, geographic heat maps. 6 months ago, when I identified Blackwood's operation, I analyzed his targeting methodology. He needed bases with specific characteristics, toxic leadership to create disillusionment, geographic isolation to make recruitment easier, good soldiers being driven away who would be receptive to his pitch. Her fingers moved across the screen. Fort Davidson had all of those elements, but more importantly, it had something else. A command structure weak enough that I could control variables. A timeline that aligned with his expansion plans. And most critically, it was a base where I could bait the trap without risking genuine catastrophic damage. Dante's face had gone pale. You chose us, made us a target. I made Fort Davidson irresistible, Alexis corrected. I requested assignment here specifically, made sure my cover would attract the right kind of attention, ensured that Sergeant Callahan's existing tendencies would escalate in predictable ways. She met his eyes without flinching. When Blackwood approached you 3 weeks ago, Dante, that wasn't random. I had been feeding intelligence into his network for months, making sure Fort Davidson appeared on his radar as a prime recruitment ground, making sure he would commit resources here. Veronica found her voice. The entire 3 months, all planned. Every detail, Alexis confirmed, from where I stood in the mess hall to the timing of tonight's revelation. I needed Blackwood to believe he was exploiting opportunity, when in reality he was walking into a trap I'd spent 6 months constructing. She gestured to the screens showing the 17 simultaneous operations. Fort Davidson was the keystone, the base where I had the most control, where I could guarantee the operation would succeed. Because if Blackwood's people were watching me here, they weren't watching the other 16 operators preparing their own revelations. Webb's tactical mind was racing. You used us as bait, the entire base, 2,000 personnel. I used the situation Blackwood created, Alexis said. He was going to target military installations regardless. Better it be bases where we controlled the variables, where we could protect the innocent and expose the guilty, where we could turn his own strategy against him. She pulled up financial records. The $200,000 offered to Dante. That came from an account we've been monitoring for 8 months. The moment the transfer went through, we had legal grounds to move against Blackwood. Everything after that was building the case. Dante's voice was barely a whisper. I thought I was taking dirty money to save my mother. I was evidence in a federal investigation. You were both, Alexis said quietly. And I'm sorry for that. Sorry that stopping Blackwood required letting you compromise yourself. But your mother is still sick. The money is still real. And now you have a choice about what to do with both. The weight of revelation settled over the canteen like fog. Hawthorne approached Alexis privately during a brief pause in the operational briefing. The canteen had cleared slightly as soldiers moved to prepare equipment. Only the core team remained. Your father, Hawthorne said quietly, James Brennan. I need to tell you something about him. Alexis turned, her expression neutral but her eyes showing interest. I served with him. Iraq, 2003. Second deployment after the initial invasion. The room seemed to fade around them. 2 warriors connected by promises made in blood. Hawthorne's voice carried the weight of memory. We were running convoy security. Dangerous work. Ambush every other day. Your father was the best officer I ever served under. Calm. Decisive. The kind of leader men would follow into hell. Alexis remained silent, letting him speak. The day he died, we were escorting medical supplies to a field hospital. Intel said the route was clear. Intel was wrong. His weathered face showed the strain of carrying this story for 23 years. They hit us from both sides. Arpies bound, small arms, coordinated attack, professional. We had 3 wounded who couldn't move fast enough to evacuate. Alexis's jaw tightened. Your father could have pulled back, could have saved himself, but he looked at those wounded soldiers, looked at me, and he said something I've never forgotten. Hawthorne's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said, I've got a 5-year-old daughter back home, Garrett. Alexis, if I don't make it, you find her when she's grown. You make sure she knows her father died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Promise me. A tear tracked down Alexis's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I promised. And then I watched him lay down, covering fire that saved all of us. He took rounds meant for 3 wounded men who would have died without him. By the time we could fight through to his position, he was gone, Alexis finished quietly. Yeah, he was gone. They stood in silence for a moment. You kept your promise, Alexis said. You found me, trained me, made sure I understood what he died for. I kept it for 23 years, Hawthorne confirmed. Watched for you. Waited until you were old enough to understand. Then I made sure you had every opportunity to become what he knew you could be. Why didn't you tell me before? Because you needed to choose this path yourself, not because of obligation to a dead man, but because you understood in your bones what service means, what protection requires. Alexis placed her hand on his weathered arm. Thank you for keeping faith, for honoring him. Your father was the best of us, Lexi. You've become even better. Then let's make sure his sacrifice meant something. Let's go get your grandson. Hawthorne's voice cut through. Lieutenant, my grandson, what's the plan to extract him? Alexis turned back to the tactical display, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. 8 contractors, standard defensive perimeter. Blackwood himself is in the central building. He's 72, but former special operations. Still dangerous despite his age. She highlighted positions on the map. They expect you to come alone, Sergeant Major. Emotional, reckless, easy to capture or kill. What they're not expecting is a coordinated assault from someone who's been planning this for weeks. Dante stepped forward, his voice hoarse. Let me help, please. I owe you that much. Owe Finn that much. Alexis studied him, reading his expression, measuring sincerity against desperation. You took Blackwood's money. Why should I trust you now? Because you're right, Dante said. About everything. I let him exploit my mother's illness. Let him turn me into something I hate. But I can still do one thing right. I can help save that kid. Alexis was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. You'll breach with me. Follow my lead exactly. One deviation and I leave you behind. Clear. Clear, ma'am. Veronica raised her hand. Communications. I can handle communications. I know the systems, know the protocols. Alexis considered. You took his money too. I know, and I'll face whatever consequences come from that. But right now you need someone who can coordinate multiple teams across different frequencies. That's my specialty. Another nod. Communications it is. Blake, you're on equipment. The weapons specialist straightened. Yes, ma'am. Alexis pulled up a detailed operations plan on her tablet, something she had clearly been refining for weeks. Positions, timing, contingencies, the kind of planning that separated successful operations from disasters. Sergeant Major Hawthorne, you'll provide overwatch from this position. She indicated a ridgeline 800 meters from the training facility. You were a master sniper in Iraq. I need those skills now. Hawthorne nodded. Consider it done. Colonel Webb, you'll coordinate with base security and ensure no one interferes with our operation. Blackwood may have other assets on base we haven't identified. I need you to lock down the perimeter. Webb came to attention. Understood, Lieutenant. You have my full support. Alexis's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been appreciation, or might have been the acknowledgement that Webb, despite being caught off guard, was responding with the professionalism expected of his rank. She turned to address the entire canteen. 200 soldiers who had witnessed transformation from entertainment to operation in the space of an hour. What happened here tonight was a test. Most of you failed. You participated in harassment. You recorded humiliation. You stood by while injustice unfolded because it was easier than speaking up. The words cut, designed to wound, to create the kind of discomfort that preceded growth. But failure is not the end, it's information. Data about who you are and who you need to become. Over the next 3 months, Fort Davidson will implement Ghost Dragon protocols, cultural transformation, leadership development, The kind of changes that turn a compromised installation into a model for military excellence. She let her gaze move across the faces. Some of you will embrace that change, will recognize tonight as the moment you started becoming better versions of yourselves. Others will resist, will cling to the old ways. Those people will be identified and removed. Her voice hardened. This military is done tolerating toxic leadership, done accepting cultures where good soldiers are driven away by bullies, done allowing people like Blackwood to exploit our weaknesses. She held up her tablet. The evidence gathered here tonight will be reviewed by personnel whose clearances exceed everyone in this room, including mine, including Colonel Webb's. Decisions will be made, careers will end, new opportunities will open. Finn felt the weight of her gaze as it passed over him. Private Hawthorne, you demonstrated moral courage. That matters. It will be noted in your file. Doors will open because of the choice you made tonight. She looked at Dante. Sergeant Callahan, you made terrible choices, but you're being given a chance at redemption. Don't waste it. To Veronica. Lieutenant Ashford, same applies. Redemption is earned, not given. Her attention moved to Hawthorne. Sergeant Major, your grandson is waiting. Time to move. The old sniper nodded, his weathered face showing the grim determination of someone preparing for violence. Lead the way, Lieutenant. Alexis tapped her tablet one final time, sending encrypted messages to teams positioned around the old training range, assets that had been waiting for this signal. Her twin sister Sarah's face appeared on screen. Identical features. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, but wearing full tactical gear. Dragon mark visible on her exposed forearm. Ghost Serpent to Shadow Twin. Status report. Sarah's voice came through clear. Perimeter secured. 8 hostiles confirmed. Blackwood in central building with the package. Waiting for your signal. Signal given. Execute in 15 minutes. Coordinate with Hawthorne for sniper support. Copy that. See you on the other side, sis. The connection closed. Alexis looked at her assembled team. Dante, Veronica, Blake, Hawthorne. An unlikely group, composed of people who had failed in various ways, but were being given one chance to do something right. We move in 10 minutes. Gear up. This is a live operation. People will shoot at us. We will shoot back. Follow training, follow orders. And we all come home. She walked toward the armory, her small frame moving with the purposeful stride of someone heading into combat. The 200 soldiers in the canteen watched her go. The woman who had been prey 30 minutes ago. The predator who had been hunting all along. And as they watched, something shifted in that room. The beginning of understanding. The first stirrings of the cultural transformation she had promised. Because sometimes change required more than orders. Sometimes it required witnessing what true strength looked like. Sometimes it required watching someone stand in the fire and emerge not just unburned, but forged into something harder, stronger, unbreakable. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The Texas night had turned cold, temperature dropping 20 degrees once the sun disappeared below the horizon. The kind of desert cold that cut through clothing and settled into bones. 3 miles north of Fort Davidson's main complex, the old training range sprawled across 200 acres of scrubland. Abandoned facilities from the 1980s, buildings with broken windows and peeling paint, obstacle courses reclaimed by weeds. The ghost of military purpose long since departed. Perfect location for what General Theodore Blackwood had planned. Alexis Brennan moved through the darkness like liquid shadow, her small frame low to the ground, every movement calculated to avoid detection. Behind her, Dante Callahan followed with surprising grace for a man his size. 3 months of toxic leadership had not erased the combat training that made him dangerous when properly directed. They had left Fort Davidson 20 minutes ago. Separate vehicles, different routes, converging on the target from multiple angles. Standard special operations protocol. Never give the enemy a single point of failure. Alexis wore full tactical gear now. Black combat uniform designed for night operations. Plate carrier with ceramic inserts. Helmet with night vision that turned darkness into green-tinted daylight. Suppressed sidearm on her thigh, M4 carbine across her chest. She looked like what she was, a weapon in human form. 800 meters to the west, Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne settled into position on a ridgeline that offered clear sight lines to the entire complex. His body protested the movements. 68-year-old joints complaining about positions that had been comfortable 30 years ago. But the muscle memory remained. The knowledge of how to become part of the landscape, how to wait with the patience of stone. He assembled his rifle with practiced efficiency, not the modern weapons the young soldiers carried. This was his personal rifle, the one he had carried in Iraq, customized, perfectly zeroed, an extension of his will made metal and wood. Through the scope, he could see heat signatures, 8 contractors positioned in defensive perimeter, professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. These were not amateurs. His earpiece crackled. Alexis's voice, low and controlled. Overwatch, Ghost Serpent, radio check. Overwatch copies. I have eyes on 8 hostiles. Positions marked on your tactical display. Copy. Stand by for execute order. Hawthorne's finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, not yet. Discipline learned through decades of patience. The best shot was the one you did not take until certainty replaced hope. In the communications vehicle parked 2 miles south, Veronica Ashford sat surrounded by radio equipment and computer screens, coordinating frequencies, monitoring multiple channels, ensuring that every element of this operation could communicate without interference. She had taken Blackwood's money, had participated in the toxic culture, had failed in ways that would haunt her for years. But right now, in this moment, she could be useful, could help save a 19-year-old kid who had done nothing wrong except stand up for what was right. Redemption was not given. It was earned, one right choice at a time. Blake Hendricks checked weapons and equipment one final time, making sure every magazine was fully loaded, every grenade properly secured, every piece of gear functioning exactly as designed. He had participated in the mockery, had joined the cruel entertainment, had been complicit through action and inaction. But weapons specialists understood something fundamental about human nature. People were defined not by their worst moment, but by what they did after that moment passed. Inside the central building of the old training facility, Finn Hawthorne sat bound to a chair, hands secured behind his back with zip ties, feet tied to the chair legs. He was scared. That was honest. Anyone who claimed not to be scared when tied to a chair surrounded by armed contractors was either lying or dangerously delusional. But he was not panicking. His grandfather had taught him that fear was information, data about danger that could be processed and used. Panic was fear without control, fear that drowned rational thought and led to stupid decisions. So Finn processed his fear, noted his heart rate, elevated but steady, observed his captors. 8 men, former military based on how they moved, assessed his environment. Old training building, concrete walls, single entrance, limited escape routes, and waited, because Lieutenant Brennan had said she had been planning for this, had tracking devices monitoring his location and vital signs, had known this might happen and prepared contingencies. He chose to trust that. General Theodore Blackwood entered the room. 72 years old, but carrying himself with the rigid posture of someone who refused to let age define him. Gray hair, cut military short, face weathered by decades of sun and stress, eyes that held the cold calculation of someone who viewed people as assets to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. He wore civilian clothes, tactical pants, and a black shirt. No uniform. He had lost that privilege 15 years ago when the court-martial stripped him of rank and honor. But he still carried himself like a general, still believed he deserved the respect that rank commanded. "Private Hawthorne," Blackwood said, his voice carrying a Texas drawl, "you're about to serve your country in ways you never imagined." Finn said nothing. His grandfather had taught him that silence was often the strongest response. Let the enemy talk. Let them reveal information. Every word was data. "Your grandfather is a legend," Blackwood continued. "Iraq war hero, master sniper, the kind of soldier this nation used to produce before it went soft." He circled Finn like a professor lecturing to a student. "Garrett Hawthorne represents everything that made America strong. Discipline, skill, the willingness to do what needed to be done without whining about feelings or fairness." Finn kept his expression neutral, refusing to give Blackwood the reaction he was fishing for. "But the military abandoned men like your grandfather," Blackwood said. "Pushed them out, replaced them with bureaucrats and politicians in uniform. People more concerned with diversity quotas than combat effectiveness." This was the recruitment pitch, the narrative Blackwood used to convince soldiers that leaving official service was patriotic rather than treasonous. "I'm building something better," Blackwood said, "an organization where skill matters more than politics, where warriors are appreciated rather than constrained." He stopped directly in front of Finn. "Your grandfather will come for you, because that's what men like him do. And when he does, I'll offer him a choice. Join me or Watch you die. Finn met his eyes. He'll kill you. Blackwood smiled. He'll try. But I have 8 professional contractors. He's 68 years old. Math is not in his favor. You're forgetting Lieutenant Brennan. The smile faltered. The Navy SEAL, yes. Impressive revelation, quite theatrical. But she's one woman, small, young, not enough to overcome superior numbers and defensive positioning. You're underestimating her. No, son, I'm using her. She revealed herself tonight because I forced her hand, made her choose between maintaining cover and saving you. Predictable, emotional, the kind of mistake that gets operators killed. Blackwood checked his watch. She has 40 minutes before I start removing your fingers. 1 every 10 minutes until either she surrenders or your grandfather does. He walked toward the door. I'd pray if I were you, because the people coming to save you are walking into a killing field. The door closed, leaving Finn alone in the concrete room. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and trusted that Lieutenant Alexis Brennan knew exactly what she was doing. Outside in the darkness beyond the range of security lights, Alexis checked her tactical display one final time. Heat signatures showing exact positions of all 8 contractors. Finn's biometrics stable. Blackwood moving from the central building toward a secondary position. Everything exactly where her planning predicted it would be. Sarah's voice came through the encrypted channel. Shadow twin in position, north perimeter clear, ready on your mark. Copy, hold position, execute on my signal. Alexis turned to Dante, his face barely visible in the darkness. But she could see enough to read his expression, fear mixed with determination. The look of someone who knew he was walking into danger but chose to do it anyway. You follow my lead exactly, she said, her voice low but firm. I move, you move. I stop, you stop. I shoot, you provide cover. Clear. Clear, ma'am. Good, because in about 90 seconds, people are going to die. I need to know you won't hesitate when the moment comes. Dante's jaw tightened. I won't hesitate. Your mother's cancer, the medical bills. That's real, that's hard. Blackwood exploited that. But taking his money didn't make you evil. It made you human. What matters now is what you do next. She checked her rifle one final time. Redemption is not about erasing the past. It's about building a different future. One choice at a time. This is your choice, Dante. Make it count. He nodded, words unnecessary. Alexis activated her throat microphone. All elements, Ghost Serpent, execute in 60 seconds. Hawthorne, you have first shot. Target Alpha, North Tower, on my mark. 800 meters away, Hawthorne adjusted his scope. Found his target. A contractor positioned in the old water tower. Perfect overwatch position. Also the first person who needed to die. Hawthorne's breathing slowed, heart rate dropping, the old familiar calm settling over him like a blanket. This was what he had been born to do, what 45 years of service had trained him for. Protect the innocent, eliminate the threat, do it with precision that left no room for error. His finger moved from guard to trigger. Gentle pressure, taking up the slack. Overwatch ready. Copy. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The rifle spoke once, a sound like a cough, suppressed but not silent. The .308 round crossed 800 meters in just over 1 second. Found its target exactly where Hawthorne had aimed. Through the scope, he watched the contractor in the tower slump forward, dead before his brain could process what had happened. Target Alpha down. Copy. Moving. Alexis was already in motion, covering ground with fluid efficiency. Dante followed, trying to match her pace, trying to move as quietly as someone half his size. They reached the outer fence. Chain link, 8 feet tall, topped with barbed wire. Alexis produced wire cutters from her tactical vest, cut through the fence in 6 places, creating an opening large enough to slip through. Through, not over. Never expose yourself on a ridgeline when you could move through cover. They were inside the perimeter. 2 contractors patrolled the eastern approach, moving in predictable patterns, talking quietly, confident in their defensive positioning. Alexis raised her rifle. Smooth, controlled. Years of training compressed into movements that required no thought. 2 shots, suppressed, barely louder than someone clapping. Both contractors dropped. Targets Bravo and Charlie down. Dante stared at the bodies, men who had been alive 3 seconds ago, now reduced to obstacles to be stepped over. Keep moving, Alexis whispered. Hesitation gets you killed. They advanced toward the central building, Another contractor appeared, rounding a corner, seeing Alexis, bringing his weapon up. Too slow. She put 2 rounds center mass before he could fire. The contractor fell backward, his rifle clattering on concrete. Alarms began to sound. Silent approach was over. Speed and violence of action now. Shadow Twin, execute assault, north entrance. Copy, moving. Sarah Brennan came through the north entrance like a hurricane. Identical twin sister. Same training, same skills. 2 contractors turned toward the new threat. Mistake. Sarah dropped them both. Precise shots that eliminated threats without wasted ammunition. North clear, 4 hostiles remaining. Alexis reached the central building's entrance. Metal door, locked. She placed a small charge. Breaching explosive. Step back. Breaching. The charge detonated, loud enough to wake the dead. The door blew inward. Smoke and dust filled the entrance. Alexis went through, rifle up, scanning for targets. Dante right behind her, trying to cover angles, trying to be useful without getting in the way. The interior was dark, emergency lighting creating pools of shadow. Perfect environment for someone who owned night vision. 2 contractors inside, disoriented by the explosion, trying to acquire targets. Alexis put them down. Clean shots. Professional execution. 6 down, 2 remaining plus Blackwood. She moved deeper into the building, toward the room where Finn was being held. Each step measured, each corner cleared. The kind of room clearing that required hundreds of hours of training to execute under stress. The door to Finn's room stood open. Inside, Blackwood held a pistol to Finn's head. "That's far enough, Lieutenant." Alexis stopped. Rifle pointed at Blackwood's center mass. But the angle was wrong. He was using Finn as a shield. Any shot risked hitting the hostage. "You're good," Blackwood said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Better than I expected. But you're also predictable, emotional. You came for the boy because you couldn't help yourself. Let him go. Not a chance. You people took everything from me. My rank, my pension, my honor, for doing what needed to be done. You sold classified information. Got American soldiers killed. I provided services to people who appreciated expertise. The military called it treason. I call it freelancing." Alexis's finger rested on the trigger. Calculating angles. Calculating risk. 1 shot. But Blackwood's head was partially concealed behind Finn's. Margin for error too small. "You built a private army," she said, keeping him talking, buying time for a better angle. "Recruited over 400 soldiers. Planned to use them for a coup." "I built a solution," Blackwood corrected. "This country is rotting from within. Someone needed to be ready to restore order when the inevitable collapse came. That's not patriotism. That's megalomania." Blackwood smiled. "History is written by victors. In 50 years, I would have been remembered as the man who saved America from itself. Instead, you'll be remembered as a traitor who died in a training facility outside Fort Davidson. Bold words for someone who doesn't have a shot." Finn's voice, quiet but clear. "She doesn't need one." Blackwood's attention flickered, just for a second, toward Finn. Mistake. Finn threw his weight sideways, the chair tipping, creating separation between his head and Blackwood's. Alexis fired. 1 shot. The suppressed M4 coughed. The round crossed 12 feet, entered Blackwood's right eye, exited the back of his skull carrying brain matter and bone fragments. The general collapsed, dead before he hit the floor. Finn crashed to the ground, still tied to the chair. But alive. Alexis was moving before Blackwood's body stopped twitching, cutting Finn's restraints with a knife from her vest, checking him for injuries. "You good, Private?" Finn's hands were shaking, adrenaline crash, but he managed to nod. "Yes, ma'am, thanks to you." "Thank yourself. Smart move with the chair." Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Building secure. 8 contractors KIA. Blackwood terminated. No friendly casualties." Alexis helped Finn to his feet. "Get him outside. Medical evaluation." Sarah nodded, taking Finn's arm, leading him toward the exit. Alexis stood over Blackwood's body, looking at the man who had threatened the constitutional order of the United States, who had exploited good soldiers' vulnerabilities, who had built corruption into a system. Now he was just meat cooling on a concrete floor. She activated her radio. "All elements, Ghost Serpent, target neutralized, compound secured, RTB, return to base, mission complete." Outside, Hawthorne was already breaking down his rifle. moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He met Alexis as she exited the building. "Your father would be proud," the old sergeant major said. Alexis met his eyes. "He taught me to stand up for what's right. You taught me how to fight for it." Both lessons mattered. The boy did good, too. He's got potential, like his grandfather. Hawthorne smiled. High praise from Ghost Serpent. They walked toward the extraction vehicles. Dante and Veronica were already there, looking shell-shocked but functioning. Blake was securing equipment. The team that should not have worked, but did, because sometimes redemption meant giving people a chance to be better than their worst moments. 7 hours later, dawn broke over Fort Davidson. The base was in lockdown. FBI agents swarming, evidence being collected, personnel being interviewed. In Colonel Webb's office, Alexis sat across the desk from the base commander, both of them running on coffee and adrenaline. 17 bases, Webb said, reading the after-action report on his classified tablet. 47 operators, all revealed simultaneously. Blackwood's entire network dismantled in one night. Coordination was essential, Alexis replied. He had contingencies, backup plans. We needed to hit everything at once or risk him disappearing. 412 soldiers offered choices. Most are accepting counseling and rehabilitation rather than court-martial. People make mistakes when they're desperate. The military failed them first by creating environments where Blackwood's pitch sounded reasonable. Webb nodded. The Ghost Dragon protocols. Cultural transformation. You really think that will work? It has to, because the alternative is more Blackwoods, more corruption, more good soldiers driven away by toxic leadership. She stood. Fort Davidson will be the model. What happens here will be studied, replicated. The changes you implement will affect military culture for a generation. No pressure, Alexis smiled, tired but genuine. You're an Iraq War veteran, Colonel. You've handled pressure before. Webb extended his hand. It's been an honor, Lieutenant. They shook. The honor was mine, sir. She walked toward the door, paused. One more thing. Private Finn Hawthorne. I'm recommending him for officer candidate school, accelerated track. Noted. I'll process the paperwork today. Alexis left the office, walking through a base that looked the same as 3 months ago but would be fundamentally different 3 months from now. Change took time, but it started with single moments, single choices, single acts of courage that cascaded into movements. 6 weeks into Alaska training, Alexis received the call she had been dreading for years. Garrett Hawthorne. Medical emergency. Fort Sam Houston. Critical. She handed command to her second and was on a transport within the hour. 6 hours of flying, every minute feeling like an eternity. The hospital at Fort Sam Houston smelled like every military hospital. Antiseptic, institutional, the particular scent of suffering managed with military efficiency. Garrett was in ICU, hooked to machines that beeped and hissed, keeping a body alive that was ready to stop fighting. Heart attack, massive. The kind that came from 68 years of pushing too hard, carrying too much, never quite letting the stress go even when the wars ended. Alexis sat beside his bed. The legendary sergeant major looked small against the white sheets, weathered face peaceful despite the tubes and wires. His eyes open, focused on her with effort. "Sir," she said quietly. "Lieutenant," his voice was barely a whisper. "How's the boy doing?" "Finn's excelling, top of his class. He's got your instincts, your patience, Rao." Garrett smiled, weak but genuine. "Good, that's good." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, the silence of people who understood each other beyond words. "Your father," Garrett said finally, each word costing him. "James, I never told you everything about that day in Iraq." Alexis leaned forward, taking his weathered hand in hers. "We were pinned down. 3 wounded who couldn't move if found enough. Iraqi fighters closing from both sides. Your father could have pulled back, could have saved himself. But he looked at those wounded soldiers and he looked at me." Garrett's eyes glistened. He said, "I've got a 5-year-old daughter, Hawthorne. Alexis, if I don't make it, you find her when she's grown. You make sure she knows her father died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. You make sure she becomes someone who does the same." A tear tracked down Alexis's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I promised him, and he covered our withdrawal. Took fire meant for all of us. By the time we could get back to him, he was gone." Garrett's grip tightened slightly. "I spent 23 years keeping that promise. Watching for you, waiting until you were old enough. making sure you had the training, the opportunities, the skills to become what he knew you could be. You kept your promise, Alexis said, her voice thick. You found me, trained me, made me into someone he'd be proud of. You became better than he ever was, Lexi, better than I ever was. You became exactly what this country needs. Someone who stands between the light and shadow, who protects those who can't protect themselves. He pulled her closer with surprising strength. The dragon protects. That's what your father understood. That's what you understand. Keep protecting. Even when it costs everything. Even when it hurts. Because that's what guardians do. I will, sir. I promise. Good. His eyes were closing. Tell Finn his grandfather was proud. Tell him to keep being who he is. I'll tell him. And Lexi, you don't need me anymore. You never really did. You were always going to be extraordinary. I just got to watch it happen. Got to help a little. That was my honor. Sir, 23 years. I kept my promise to James. Now I can rest. The heart monitor's rhythm slowed. Irregular. Weaker. Thank you, Alexis whispered. For everything. For keeping your promise. For making me into this. Garrett Hawthorne smiled one last time. Semper Fi, kiddo. The monitor flatlined. Alexis sat holding his hand as the machines screamed their electronic grief, as nurses rushed in with crash cart and desperate urgency, as they tried everything to restart a heart that had decided it was done. After 10 minutes, the doctor called it. Time of death, 08:47 hours. Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne, age 68, Iraq War veteran, master sniper, guardian of promises made in blood. Gone. Alexis stayed until they covered his face with the sheet. Then she walked out into the Texas morning that he would never see again. She found a quiet spot behind the hospital, away from people, away from eyes, and she let herself break. Not for long, just long enough to honor what he had meant, what he had given, the promise he had kept for more than 2 decades. Then she pulled herself together, because guardians didn't have the luxury of staying broken. People were counting on her. The mission continued even when the people who started it were gone. 3 days later, Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery, full military honors, 21 gun salute. Taps played by a bugler whose notes carried across the perfectly manicured grass where thousands of soldiers slept. The casket draped an American flag. Crisp. Perfect. The way Garrett would have demanded. Alexis stood at attention in her dress uniform. The dragon mark hidden beneath layers of fabric and protocol, but present nonetheless. Always present. Finn stood beside her, fresh from Alaska, granted emergency leave, his young face struggling with the weight of losing the man who had raised him. Webb was there. Dante, Veronica, Blake. Soldiers from Fort Davidson who had been transformed by what Garrett had helped create. Sarah stood on Alexis's other side. Twin sister, same uniform, same grief held behind professional mask. The chaplain spoke words about service and sacrifice, about men who gave everything so others could have tomorrow. Then it was Alexis's turn. She stepped to the podium, looking out at hundreds of soldiers who had come to honor one of their own. Sergeant Major Garrett Hawthorne taught me that honor isn't about being perfect, she began, her voice steady despite the grief underneath. It's about standing up when it matters, even at 68, even when your body tells you to stop. She paused, collecting thoughts that had been forming for 3 days. He carried my father's memory for 23 years, a promise made in combat, to a dying man, to find his daughter and make sure she knew her father died, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Her eyes found Finn's. He taught me that promises matter. That character is revealed not in victory, but in how you handle the years after. The decades of showing up, of keeping faith, of protecting those who come after you. She looked at the casket. My father gave his life in Iraq. Sergeant Major Hawthorne gave his life to honoring what my father believed in. And now it's my turn, our turn, to carry forward what they both stood for. She stepped back, saluted. The rifle volley cracked across the cemetery. 7 riflemen, 3 volleys. The thunder of honor rendered to the fallen. Then taps, that mournful melody that every soldier knew, that spoke of endings and sacrifice and the debt that could never be repaid. As the casket was lowered, Alexis placed something on top of the flag. Her father's dog tags, the ones Garrett had carried for 23 years after recovering them from the battlefield. 2 soldiers, 2 wars, 2 men who had understood what it meant to protect others. Now they could rest together. After the service, Sarah found Alexis sitting alone on the chapel steps. The twin sisters, identical in appearance, united in purpose and grief. Sarah sat beside her. No words necessary. They had shared a womb, had trained together, had fought on different continents for the same cause. "He was proud of you," Sarah said finally. "Used to call me sometimes, just to talk about what you were doing, what you'd become." You could hear it in his voice, the pride, the satisfaction of a promise kept. Alexis felt her throat tighten. "So now what?" Sarah asked. "We keep going, keep fighting." Alexis pulled out the medallion from her pocket, the one Garrett had made for the Hawthorne men before he died. "We fight because it's what guardians do," Alexis said, "not because someone told us to, but because we've seen what happens when good people don't stand up, when corruption is allowed to fester." She closed her hand around the medallion. "Garrett and Dad showed us what it costs to protect people, what it requires, and they showed us it's worth it." Sarah lifted her head, met her twins' eyes. Phase 5. Phase 5, Alexis confirmed. 50 installations across allied nations, 18 months. That's a lot of breaking. "Then it's good there's two of us," Sarah smiled. "The Brennan sisters, twin dragons, protecting a world that'll never know our names." "Sounds like a plan." They stood together, two women who looked identical but had forged their own paths, who had become guardians not because of destiny, but because of choice. "Love you, sis," Sarah said. "Love you too." 3 months later, Fort Davidson had been transformed. The mess hall where it all began now featured plaques honoring soldiers who demonstrated moral courage. Finn Hawthorne's name was first. Dante Callahan stood in front of a classroom, teaching ethical leadership to new recruits. His rank was still private first class, would be for another year, but his voice carried the authority of someone who had failed, learned, and grown. 3 months ago, he told the assembled soldiers, "I stood in that mess hall and demonstrated everything a leader should not be. What I learned is that leadership is not about making people fear you. It's about inspiring them to be better than they thought they could be." In another building, Veronica Ashford led a mentorship session for female officers. 20 women of various ranks gathered to discuss challenges and strategies for success. "For years, I believed I had to be harder than the men around me," Veronica said. "What I learned is that real strength is lifting others up rather than tearing them down." Blake Hendricks discovered he had a gift for patient instruction, teaching soldiers how to handle weapons with confidence and respect. The statistics were impressive. Unit cohesion up 87%, security incidents down 94%. But the real change was harder to quantify. It was in how people treated each other, in the knowledge that moral courage mattered more than rank. 2 weeks later, Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. Lieutenant Finn Hawthorne stepped off the transport into cold that hit like a physical force. -20 degrees, wind cutting through his parka. He was no longer the 19-year-old private who had stood up in a mess hall. 6 months of training had transformed him, hardened him, given him skills most soldiers would never possess. A figure waited on the tarmac. Lieutenant Alexis Brennan, Ghost Serpent. She approached. They saluted. Then she extended her hand. "Welcome back, Lieutenant Hawthorne." "Thank you, ma'am. Good to be back. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've become." Finn felt the weight of those words. "I hope so, ma'am." "I know so. He told me before he died, said you had what it takes, said you'd make a fine officer." He was right. She gestured toward the training facility. "Phase 4 is complete. You and 11 others made it through. 12% success rate." "What's next?" Alexis's expression shifted, something that might have been a smile. "Next, you help me recruit the next generation. We've identified 63 new candidates. They arrive in 2 weeks. You'll help train them." "Me, ma'am, I just finished training myself." "Which makes you perfect. You remember what it was like. You can relate to them in ways I can't." She started walking. Finn fell in step beside her. "Plus, I need someone I can trust. Someone who's demonstrated moral courage." They walked in silence for a moment. "The world's getting more complicated, Finn. Blackwood was the one man, but the intelligence we gathered showed something bigger. Dozens of similar operations. We need to expand. That requires people like you." Finn thought about his grandfather, about the promise Garrett had kept for 23 years, about the legacy of protection that stretched back to Captain James Brennan, dying in Iraq. "I'm in, ma'am, whatever you need." "Good, because in 3 months you're deploying to Germany, working with my sister Sarah, your first real assignment outside training environment. Indent." The weight of that settled on Finn's shoulders. The responsibility. The trust being placed in him. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Your grandfather trained you too well for that. They entered the facility. Inside, a package sat on the table. From your grandfather. He asked me to give this to you when you completed Phase 4. Finn opened it carefully. Inside was Garrett's personal rifle, the one he had carried in Iraq, the one he had used during Finn's rescue. A note was attached in Garrett's familiar handwriting. Finn, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've made it through training. I'm proud of you, boy. This rifle has protected a lot of good people over the years. Your turn now. Remember, the best shot is the one you don't have to take. But when you do take it, make it count. The dragon protects. Now it's your turn to be part of that protection. Grandpa. Finn felt his eyes sting. He blinked it back. He gave me something similar, Alexis said quietly. The dog tags. The promise. The responsibility of carrying forward what he started. She placed her hand on Finn's shoulder. We carry them with us, not as weight, but as wings. They lift us up, remind us why we do this. Finn nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in his throat. Get some rest, Alexis said. Tomorrow we start planning Germany. You've got 2 months to prepare. She walked toward the door, paused, and Finn welcomed to the Dragon Balance. You've earned your place among us. 6 months later, Pentagon, secure briefing room, classification level above top secret. Alexis stood before a screen showing global operations. 50 installations marked across allied nations, defense officials, generals, people whose names never appeared in public but whose decisions shaped the world. Phase 4 complete, Alexis reported. 63 candidates, 8 graduated. All 8 currently deployed in European and Pacific theaters. The officials nodded. Phase 5 timeline, 18 months for full implementation. We've identified corruption patterns at 37 already. One of the generals spoke up. Lieutenant Brennan, your father. Captain James Brennan, he was one of mine. Iraq, 2003. I was his battalion commander. He died saving 3 of my soldiers. The general stood. Sergeant Major Hawthorne kept a promise to your father. Watched over you, made you into this. Now you're doing the same for the next generation. That's legacy, Lieutenant. That's what service means. He saluted her. A general, saluting a lieutenant. The room went quiet. Your father would be proud. Hawthorne would be proud. What you've built here, that's what we're supposed to be about. Alexis returned the salute. Thank you, sir. Phase 5 is approved. Full resources. Whatever you need. Yes, sir. The briefing concluded. Officials filed out, leaving Alexis alone with the global map and the weight of what came next. Her phone buzzed. Message from Sarah. Europe is ready. Time to clean house. Another message from Finn. Deployment confirmed. Landing in Munich next week. Ready to make Grandpa proud. Alexis smiled. The Dragon Balance had started as 12 operators. A legend. A mark earned through sacrifice. Now it was growing, expanding, becoming something that could actually change the fundamental culture of military service. She looked at the map one more time. 50 installations, thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of lives that could be protected or corrupted depending on the choices made in the next 18 months. The work was never finished. The hunt never ended. But neither did the protection. Alaska Training Facility. Night. Snow falling. Alexis stands alone on the observation deck, looking out at the vast wilderness. Behind her, inside the facility, operators train. The next generation learning what it means to protect. She pulls out 2 items from her pocket. Her father's dog tags, worn, carried through decades by Garrett Hawthorne, now hers to carry forward. And Garrett's compass, the one he'd carried in Iraq, the one that had guided him home, the one he'd used to keep his promise. She holds them both. I've got it from here, she whispers to the night, to the ghosts of 2 soldiers who had shown her what service meant. The dragon protects. I'll make sure it continues. The wind carries her words away into the Alaskan darkness. But somewhere in whatever place soldiers go when their watch ends, 2 men smiled. Their promises kept. Their legacy alive. The protection continuing.